I never thought I would see my parents again, not after 20 silent years, not after becoming a mother at 16, and certainly not after building the kind of life they once swore I'd never deserve. But there they were standing in the courtroom aisle, whispering with smug little smiles as if fate had finally shifted in their favor. They believed they'd trapped me. They believed the law would crush me. They didn't know who I had become. They didn't know the weight of the gavel I now carried. And they definitely didn't know their own lawyer was about to walk past them, stop in front of me, and say the words that would drain the color from their faces. "Good morning, Judge." Only then, only in that suspended, breathless moment did my story truly begin. People often assume everything in a judge's life has been neat and straight, like a perfectly ruled sheet of lined paper. They imagine clean decisions, calm days, organized years. They don't picture chaos or nights spent crying into a pillow. They don't picture a girl who once stood on a cold porch with nothing but a plastic grocery bag of clothes. But that was me. 16 years old, pregnant, alone. And my parents, Harold and Denise, were the ones who put me there. I still remember the night it happened, late October, the kind where the wind already feels like November and the sky has a heavy, empty look to it. My mother was at the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes sharp. My father paced behind her like he wished the floor would crack open and swallow me. They didn't scream. I almost wished they had. Screaming means emotion. Screaming means you care enough to let yourself lose control. What they gave me instead was worse, cold-clipped disappointment, the kind that freezes a person from the inside out. "You've embarrassed us," my mother said. "You've ruined your future," my father added. "So you'll leave tonight," she finished. They didn't even say the word pregnant, as if refusing to say it would erase the reality of the life inside me. I remember staring down at my hands, thinking how strange it was that the same hands could hold a pen at school that morning, and now held the weight of a decision that wasn't even mine. I had nowhere to go except the one place that had always felt like a refuge, my grandmother's house. Grandma Margaret, a widow for almost 2 decades, the woman who baked pies for every church event even when she couldn't taste sugar anymore. The woman who ran a tiny vegetable stand on the edge of her property because talking to folks keeps me alive longer. A woman who could forgive anything except cruelty. When she opened the door that night, I didn't even speak. I just stood there shivering, holding that ridiculous plastic bag. She looked at me for half a second, and I swear she knew everything. Her eyes softened and she stepped aside. "Come in, baby," she whispered. No judgment, no lecture, just warmth. I collapsed into her arms. She held me like she'd been waiting my whole life to catch me. She set me up in the guest room. Clean sheets, a little lamp by the window, a quilt her own mother had stitched by hand. She brought me tea, sat at the edge of the bed, and said the first kind words I'd heard all night. "You're not alone, not as long as I'm breathing." For the first time since I saw that pink line on the test, I felt something other than fear. I felt safe. In school, I became the girl everyone whispered about, the pregnant one, the one whose parents kicked her out. High school judgment is sharp but temporary. The judgment that cuts the deepest is the one from your own blood, the kind that stays under your skin no matter how old you get. Grandma made everything feel survivable. She drove me to doctor appointments in her old Chevy truck with the peeling blue paint. She cooked me oatmeal every morning even when I insisted I wasn't hungry. She told me I was strong long before I believed it. "You'll get through this," she said often. "You're tougher than you know." She didn't have much money, but she spent everything she had on the things I needed: maternity clothes, vitamins, baby supplies. She clipped coupons like it was a second job. She saved every dime from her vegetable stand. Looking back, I think she started saving for me long before she ever told anyone. In the late months of my pregnancy, she'd sit with me on the porch swing. We'd watch cars pass on the country road, headlights glowing through the tall maples. "What do you want out of life?" she'd ask. I didn't know how to answer. My world was small diapers, doctor visits, getting through one day at a time. "I just want to give my baby something better than what I had," I finally said. She squeezed my hand. "And you will." When I went into labor, Grandma practically ran into the hospital lobby waving her purse like a flag. Nurses smiled. They loved her. Everyone did. And when my son was finally placed in my arms, tiny, warm, smelling like a fresh beginning, I cried in a way that felt like cleansing. Grandma cried too. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You're a mother now." In that moment, I wasn't the girl my parents abandoned. I wasn't the mistake they said I'd made. I was someone new, someone who had purpose, someone who had a future, though I didn't know yet how hard I'd have to fight for it. But that night, holding my son close, I made myself a promise. I would build a life. I would build a future, and one day I would make sure that no one, not even my parents, could ever make me feel small again. People often imagine that turning 16 and becoming a mother means your life stops, but mine didn't stop at all. It just became heavier, like I was suddenly responsible for holding up 2 futures instead of 1. My son Jacob needed everything: feedings, diaper changes, doctor visits, warmth, love, and stability. Grandma gave us a roof, but the rest was up to me. Those early months were a blur of sleepless nights and determination. I remember sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., rocking Jacob with one hand while doing algebra homework with the other. Grandma would shuffle in wearing her old flannel robe, pretending she just happened to wake up, and she'd take him gently from my arms. "Finish your work," she'd say. "You can't build a future by quitting." It wasn't just encouragement, it was expectation. She believed in me fiercely, and I didn't want to disappoint her. I finished high school through an alternative program that let me study while caring for a newborn. When I walked across that stage the following spring, Jacob was in Grandma's lap wearing a tiny blue bow tie. My parents didn't come. I told myself I didn't care. But when I saw other kids hugging their parents, something inside me sagged like an old porch rail. Still, I looked back and saw Grandma blowing me a kiss, pride shining from her like sunlight. After graduation, I took a job at the local grocery store, bagging items, pushing carts in the heat-stocking shelves late into the night. Hard work didn't scare me. What scared me was the idea of standing still. Every time I punched the time clock, I'd whisper the same promise to myself: "This isn't forever." But money was tight. Tight in the way that makes you calculate gas miles, cut cereal boxes in half to make the contents last longer, and pray nothing breaks. Some nights I'd lie in bed and hear Grandma through the wall coughing softly. A reminder that she wasn't young, that her time was finite, and I couldn't rely on her forever. The turning point came one afternoon when a contractor tried to scam her. He claimed her roof needed urgent repairs and tried to charge her thousands of dollars up front. I watched Grandma straighten her back, narrow her eyes, and say, "Young man, I wasn't born yesterday." But he wouldn't relent. I stepped in calm, firm, and surprisingly confident. "Sir, we're not signing anything. If you don't leave, I'll call the sheriff." He left faster than a cat off a hot stove. Grandma looked at me afterward, impressed. "You ever thought about law?" she asked. Law me, a girl who once hid in the school bathroom to cry because someone wrote "ruined" on my locker. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Law wasn't just about rules, it was about protecting people like Grandma, people like me, people who didn't have anyone to stand up for them. So I enrolled in community college. I studied during Jacob's naps, read case studies while stirring spaghetti sauce, and listened to lectures through cheap earbuds while folding laundry. Every assignment felt like chiseling a tiny piece of a new future. Money was still tight, so I took a second job cleaning offices after hours. I'd carry Jacob in a baby sling as I vacuumed and emptied trash bins. Sometimes he'd fall asleep against my chest to the hum of the vacuum cleaner. I'd kiss the top of his head and whisper, "One day you'll understand why Mommy works so hard." When I finally transferred to a state university for my bachelor's degree, Jacob was starting kindergarten. He'd bring home drawings of houses and stick figures and proudly say, "That's me and Mommy and Grandma." We never spoke about my parents, not yet, but I sometimes wondered how they lived, knowing their grandson existed somewhere out there. The day I got my acceptance letter to law school, Grandma held it as if it were a fragile treasure. "Baby, you're gonna change lives," she whispered. Law school was grueling. 3 years of reading until my eyes blurred, studying late at night with cheap coffee and practicing arguments in front of the bathroom mirror. I wasn't the youngest in my class, but I was the most determined because failure wasn't an option. I didn't have the luxury of giving up. I took the bar exam with shaking hands, terrified I'd let everyone down. When the results came back and I saw my name on the pass list, I dropped to my knees in the living room and sobbed. Grandma hugged me, rocking me like she had the night I first came to her doorstep. "You did it," she said through tears. "My girl did it." My first years as a public defender taught me everything law school didn't: how to talk to people who had nothing left to lose, how to keep your heart soft and your mind sharp, how to fight battles that didn't always end in victory. I learned the system was flawed but not hopeless. Every win, no matter how small, was fuel. As Jacob grew older, our life slowly stabilized. We saved a little. We fixed things that had been broken. We bought a used car that didn't stall at stoplights. Simple things, but they felt like luxury after years of scraping by. Then, in my early 30s, I was appointed assistant district attorney. Grandma baked an apple pie to celebrate. Jacob, now a teenager, rolled his eyes but hugged me anyway. Life felt steady, secure, full. But life has a way of shifting without warning. One afternoon, Grandma fainted in her garden. Jacob found her lying beside her tomato plants, dirt on her palms, a peaceful look on her face. The doctors said it was her heart. They did what they could, but she was old, and sometimes bodies simply decide they've carried enough. In the hospital, she took my hand and said, "You gave me 20 extra years, baby. Don't you grieve too hard." I cried at her bedside like a child, even though I was a grown woman with a career, a home, and a son of my own. Losing her felt like losing the foundation of my entire existence. She passed quietly 2 nights later. I thought the hardest part was saying goodbye. I didn't know the real shock was still coming, something that would change everything I believed about my future. In the days after Grandma passed, the house felt unbearably quiet, too still, as if even the walls were grieving. I kept expecting to hear the shuffle of her slippers on the hardwood floors, or the soft creak of her favorite rocker in the corner. But each time I walked through the rooms, all I heard was the empty hum of silence, the kind that wraps around your ribs and squeezes. Jacob tried to act strong, but grief sits heavy on a home. He'd linger in the doorway of her bedroom, staring at her neatly folded quilts, the framed church potluck pictures, the little porcelain bird collection she kept on her dresser. "It doesn't feel right," he said once. "She was always here." "I know," I whispered, pulling him close. "We'll get through it." The funeral was simple, exactly the way she wanted. A small church, a small choir, hymns she loved. Members of the community came: farmers, retirees, former customers from her vegetable stand, women from her quilting circle. They shared stories I had never heard, stories of kindness she never bragged about. "Your grandma once gave me groceries when my husband lost his job," one woman told me, her eyes shining. "She fixed my fence herself after a storm," an older man said. "She lent me money when I was sick," another whispered. With every memory shared, I realized Grandma had carried not just me but entire pieces of our town quietly on her back. She never wanted applause. She just did what was right. After the service, the small-town attorney, Mr. Whitaker, asked me to come by his office in a few days. His tone was gentle, almost hesitant, which made me nervous. But I assumed it was the usual paperwork you deal with after someone dies: accounts, assets, closing utilities, probate filings. The unglamorous side of loss. 2 days later, I drove to his office on Main Street. It was a narrow brick building wedged between the barber shop and a bakery that still smelled like cinnamon rolls even in the afternoon. The waiting room had mismatched chairs and faded magazines from 5 years ago, the kind of place that felt like time itself had slowed down. Whitaker ushered me inside. He was in his 70s, gray-haired, with glasses that slid down his nose whenever he talked. His desk was cluttered with paper stacks, a green banker's lamp, and a picture of his grandchildren in Halloween costumes. "Thank you for coming," he said gently, closing the door. "Please sit." I took the chair across from him. My palms were cold. He could tell. "I know this is difficult timing." He began softly, "But Margaret, your grandmother, was very thorough in her planning. She left a will, and some instructions." I nodded, bracing myself. He pulled a folder from his desk, opened it, and adjusted his glasses. "Your grandmother named you her sole beneficiary." I blinked, confused. "That makes sense. She didn't have much." His eyes softened. "Actually, she did." A strange hush filled the room. I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He turned the folder around, showing me paperwork, legal documents, property sale records, financial statements, bank ledgers. Numbers swam before my eyes. Several years ago, he said a development company bought a portion of her farmland, the wooded acres behind her house. I knew about the land, but had always assumed it was of little value. Just trees, trails, old fencing, and the abandoned barn I used to play in as a child. She sold the land quietly, Whitaker continued. Never spent a dime of it. She insisted the money be kept safe. For the girl who needs a new beginning someday. My throat tightened. How much I whispered. He cleared his throat. After the land sale, the investments, and accrued interest, the total is approximately $1.6 million. The number hit me like a physical force, sharp, dizzying. I gripped the armrest, certain I'd misheard. 1.6 million, I repeated. He nodded gently. I know it's overwhelming. She planned it all very carefully. She wanted to make sure you and your son had security, stability, a future she believed you deserved. I covered my face with both hands, my shoulders shaking. This wasn't joy. It was grief, wrapped in gratitude, painful in the way only deep love can be. Grandma had lived frugally, clipping coupons, wearing the same winter coat for years, just so she could leave me something she herself never enjoyed. The room blurred through tears. I wish she'd told me, I whispered. She said you'd insist she spend it on herself, he replied, and she wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet first. That sounded exactly like her. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal documents, account transfers, and quiet moments when I'd catch myself looking at her empty chair, wishing I could tell her how much this meant. I didn't rush to spend the money. Instead, I created a small scholarship fund for teenage mothers trying to finish school. I donated to local legal aid offices that had once helped us, and I saved the rest, carefully determined not to waste a gift so heavy with purpose. In my grief, I almost forgot there were people besides Grandma who still carried her last name, Harold and Denise, my parents, the ones who had erased me from their lives 20 years earlier. They found out about the inheritance before I was ready to hear their voices again. It started with a voicemail. I was walking through the courthouse hallway, files under my armheels clicking, when my phone buzzed. Hello, it's your father. I froze. I heard about Margaret's will. We should talk. Then my mother's voice clipped, rehearsed. Call us back, it's important. My stomach tightened. I didn't return the call. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Neat handwriting, formal tone. We believe the inheritance was rightfully ours. We expect a portion to be transferred. We will take legal action if necessary. Legal action. They wanted the money, no apology, no acknowledgement of the years they abandoned me. My hands trembled as I held the paper. I hadn't heard their voices in 2 decades, and now they were demanding a fortune left by the woman who saved my life. But the thing about life is that storms rarely come alone. A week later, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw their car parked out front. They were back, not for me, not for Jacob, not for reconciliation. They had returned for $1.6 million, the final gift of the woman who gave me everything. When I stepped out of my car and saw my parents standing on my lawn, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, an old familiar tightening in my chest, like I was 16 again, and bracing for the next blow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows behind them, making them look taller, sharper, almost like ghosts from a childhood I'd tried to bury. My father was the first to speak. We need to talk, he said, his voice flat, as if the last 20 years were nothing more than a pause in a conversation. I didn't invite them inside. Instead, I kept one hand on my car door, ready to shut it if I needed to. About what? My mother clutched her purse against her chest the same way she used to hold on to her judgments. You know why we're here. Then I'll save you time, I said. The answer is no. Her lips thinned the way they always did when something didn't go her way. This isn't just about you. That land belonged to our family. And Grandma chose to leave it to me, I replied. My father stepped forward, his jaw tightening. She wasn't well. She didn't know what she was doing. That was a lie, and he knew it. Grandma had been sharper at 72 than most people were at 50. Her mind had been clear until the very end, clearer, in fact, than his sense of decency. I kept my voice steady. She planned her will carefully. She made her decisions long before she got sick. My mother scoffed. She manipulated you. She always spoiled you. The accusation hit like a cold gust, but instead of shrinking, I stood straighter. She loved me. That's different. My father's eyes hardened. We're not leaving without a discussion. Then you'll be standing here a while, I said. I walked past them and went inside, closing the door before either of them could protest. My hands shook as I locked it. Even after all these years, their presence could rattle me, but the difference now was that I wasn't powerless. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. A lawsuit. Filed by my own parents. Petition for distribution of estate assets. They were suing me for the inheritance, all $1.6 million. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Grandma used to slice apples for pie, and let the weight of the paper sink in. Jacob watched me from across the room, worry clouding his features. "Mom," he asked, "what is it?" I slid the papers toward him. His eyes widened as he read. "They can't do this. They abandoned you." "I know," I said quietly. "So what now?" I exhaled slowly. "Now, we fight." The following weeks were a blur of legal filings, consultations, and uncomfortable meetings in courthouse conference rooms. I couldn't represent myself, it would have been a conflict of interest, but I found an attorney I trusted, a woman named Rachel Downs, smart, steady-handed, and direct. She reviewed the case file and raised an eyebrow. "They don't have a leg to stand on," she said. "The will is airtight. Your grandmother did everything by the book." "That won't stop them," I said. "No," Rachel agreed, "but the truth will." She wasn't wrong, but truth doesn't stop people who are driven by anger, pride, or greed, and my parents had all three. Everywhere I went in town, people whispered. Some pitied me, some shook their heads at my parents, some pretended not to know anything, even though in small towns news travels faster than wind. One afternoon, while I waited in line at the grocery store, a woman took a few hesitant steps toward me. "I'm sorry about what you're going through," she murmured. I forced a smile. "Thank you." She leaned closer. "Everyone knows Margaret wanted the best for you. She would be proud." Her words steadied me in a way I didn't expect. Pride, love, those were the things Grandma left me long before the money. A month later, the court date arrived. The courthouse parking lot was almost full. People from town had come to watch, not out of cruelty, but because small communities are stitched together by stories, and this one had grown larger than any of us. I walked up the steps in a simple navy blue suit, my hair pinned neatly. Rachel walked beside me, carrying her briefcase like a shield. My parents stood near the entrance with their attorney, a tall, polished man named Richard Hall. He looked like someone who played golf on weekends and charged by the minute. They smiled when they saw me, a smug confidence radiating from their posture. Mom leaned toward Dad and whispered something that made him chuckle. They actually believed they were going to win. The sight didn't make me angry. It just made me sad that 20 years hadn't softened them, not even a little. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with chatter. Wooden benches creaked. The air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaning polish. When I sat down, I felt eyes on me, some sympathetic, some curious, some stunned to see the daughter they once shamed, now sitting poised and collected. As we waited for the judge to enter, I kept my breathing steady. Rachel whispered, "You ready?" "I have to be." The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." The judge, another colleague of mine but not a close one, took the bench. My parents exchanged glances, still completely unaware of the shift that was about to unfold. Then the door in the side hallway opened again. Their attorney entered the courtroom. Richard Hall, confident stride, leather briefcase, silver tie clip catching the overhead light. My parents straightened, smiling proudly, expecting him to greet them with the warmth of an ally. Instead, he walked right past them. He stopped in front of me. He nodded respectfully, deeply, almost reverently. And then he said in a clear, steady voice that echoed through the silent courtroom, "Good morning, Judge." My parents froze. The color drained from my mother's face first, then my father's. Their eyes widened, confusion turning into panic, as if they'd only just realized the truth. The daughter they abandoned, the daughter they were trying to rob, the daughter they believed beneath them. Was the judge their own lawyer answered to? In that single moment, the ground shifted beneath their feet, and they knew it. For a long moment, the courtroom stayed frozen, as if the air itself couldn't decide what to do next. Even the overhead lights seemed to hum louder. I sat completely still, not out of pride, not out of triumph, but because every emotion I felt was crashing together, relief, grief, disbelief, and something deeper, a strange sense of closure I hadn't expected. It was my parents' faces that I will never forget. My mother's hand trembled as she clutched her purse knuckles white. My father blinked rapidly, his mouth parting slightly like he wanted to object to reality itself. They had walked into this courtroom believing I was the weakest person here. Instead, they were discovering I had spent 20 years becoming someone they never imagined I could be. Rachel leaned close, whispering, "You okay?" "Yes," I said quietly, "I'm okay." Richard Hall, my parents' attorney, straightened his tie with a stiff, almost embarrassed motion. It wasn't easy for a man like him to show deference to someone half his age, but he did it without hesitation because the bench demanded respect, regardless of personal connections. My parents exchanged frantic glances with him, trying to signal him over, but he ignored them for the moment. Instead, he took his place at their table, cleared his throat, and offered a polite nod to the presiding judge. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced between us, and said evenly, "Shall we proceed?" And just like that, the room exhaled and the hearing began. My parents' attorney started strong, at least on paper. He argued that my grandmother had been unduly influenced, that her mental capacity had been compromised, that I had somehow manipulated her into altering her estate. But rhetoric can only take you so far. Evidence is what holds weight. And evidence was not on their side. Rachel began by calmly laying out the timeline, every medical evaluation showing Grandma's mental clarity, every document signed with witnesses present, every financial statement handled through legitimate channels. She showed the receipts of Grandma's land sale, her investments, her tax filings, all organized, consistent, structured, exactly the way Grandma lived her life. She wasn't confused, Rachel said. She was deliberate. I felt my throat tighten. Deliberate. Yes, that was Grandma. Rachel continued. Moreover, Your Honor, the petitioners, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, had no contact with the decedent for over 20 years. My father squirmed. My mother straightened with forced dignity. Rachel opened a file. Here are school records, medical forms, and statements from former teachers verifying that the respondent, she gestured toward me, was abandoned by both parents at age 16, pregnant, and without resources. A low ripple moved across the courtroom. People knew pieces of the story, but hearing it formally under oath was different. My mother shot me a sharp, accusatory glare as if I had told on her like a child revealing a broken vase. She leaned toward her attorney, hissing something. He didn't react. He simply rubbed his forehead as if wondering how he'd gotten himself into this mess. Rachel proceeded, voice steady and unwavering. There were no attempts at reconciliation, no financial support, no communication, nothing but silence. The judge nodded slowly, making notes. Then Rachel placed one final document on the table. This is a handwritten letter from Margaret Dawson to her estate attorney, Mr. Whitaker. It outlines her intention to leave everything to her granddaughter. It explicitly states she earned a life they tried to deny her. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge went still. Meanwhile, my parents sat stiff, their expressions folding into something brittle like thin ice cracking on a pond. When my father finally took the stand, he tried to regain footing. "I didn't abandon her," he said. "She left." "She left because you threw her out," Rachel countered. He swallowed, eyes flicking toward me. "We were overwhelmed. She was too young. It was embarrassing. But we thought she'd learn a lesson." A lesson. That old familiar ache pushed against my ribs. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And what lesson was she supposed to learn by being homeless at 16? My father's jaw tightened. "She made choices." "So did you," Rachel said quietly. He fell silent. When my mother took the stand, she tried a different tactic, tears. Her voice shook. She twisted a tissue in her hands. "I loved my daughter," she insisted. "I still do." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And in those 20 years, how many birthdays did you call her for?" My mother wiped her eyes. "None." "Graduations?" "None." "Did you meet your grandson?" More tears. "No." "Did you send a card, a letter, anything at all?" She shook her head. "Mrs. Dawson, would you say those are the actions of loving parents?" My mother stared down at her hands. Her silence was louder than any answer. By the time both sides finished presenting, the truth lay bare across the courtroom like an unrolled scroll. No theatrics, no shouting, just the cold, steady facts of who we all were. My parents weren't villains, not in the grand storybook sense. But they were flawed, prideful, stubborn, and ashamed. And sometimes that combination creates its own kind of cruelty. When closing arguments finished, the judge leaned back, his expression grave but calm. "This is not a close case," he said. "The evidence overwhelmingly supports the validity of the decedent's will. Margaret Dawson acted independently and with full capacity. Her intentions were clear. There is no legal basis for awarding any portion of the estate to the petitioners." My parents stiffened. "It is therefore the ruling of this court," he continued, "that the petition for distribution is denied in full." Denied. A single word, but it echoed like a gavel strike across the entire room. My mother gasped softly, covering her mouth. My father's shoulders sagged as though a lifetime of unspoken regrets had suddenly grown heavier. Their attorney closed his briefcase slowly, almost gently, like he was handling fragile glass. Rachel touched my arm. "It's over." But it didn't feel over, not yet. Because winning isn't the same as closure. Winning doesn't unwrite years of abandonment. Winning doesn't heal the 16-year-old girl who once stood alone on a porch shivering in the dark. As the courtroom emptied, I saw my parents standing together, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. For the first time, I realized that age had caught up with them. The lines on their faces were deeper, their posture weaker, their certainty shaken. Part of me wanted to walk past them without a word, but another part, the part Grandma raised, stopped me. My father looked up, eyes tired. "We never should have," he whispered. My mother swallowed hard. "We didn't know you'd become this." I met their gaze evenly. "You could have known," I said softly, "if you'd stayed." Neither replied. They looked away, not out of pride, but shame. For the first time in my life, I saw them not as the monsters of my past, but as two deeply flawed, deeply human people who had made terrible choices and were now paying their own emotional price. After the courtroom emptied, I sat alone on one of the benches, letting the silence settle. My hands rested on my lap, still and steady, but my mind moved like a slow river, steady, but carrying so much beneath the surface. Winning should have felt triumphant. There should have been some burst of vindication, some overwhelming rush of satisfaction. Instead, all I felt was hollow. Not broken, not victorious, just hollow, like too many pieces of my past had been stirred up at once, and the dust hadn't settled yet. Rachel packed her files and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You handled today with more grace than most people ever could." "Thank you," I murmured. "You want me to walk you out?" "I'll be okay, I just need a minute." She nodded, squeezed my arm, and left me in the quiet. It wasn't the victory that weighed on me, it was the sight of my parents' faces. Shock first, then fear, then shame. I didn't want to pity them, but part of me couldn't help it. They had spent so many years clinging to pride that they had nothing left to hold once it cracked. The bailiff approached quietly. "Judge, the building's closing soon." Old habits made me straighten. "Of course, thank you." Technically, I wasn't on the bench today, but being called judge still pulled me into that familiar posture of responsibility. I gathered my coat and briefcase and made my way toward the back stairs, the quieter exit. As I descended, I heard footsteps behind me. "Wait." I turned. My father. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in spirit, like a man who had finally been forced to look at the life he built and found it lacking. My mother stood a few steps behind him, clutching her purse again, eyes red from crying. I didn't move toward them, but I didn't walk away either. My father cleared his throat. We didn't know that you'd become a judge," I finished. He nodded, ashamed. "Yes." My mother blinked back tears. "We didn't know anything about your life." "Whose choice was that?" I asked gently. Neither answered. My father shifted his weight. "We were wrong, about everything. We know that now." My mother swallowed hard. "We can't change what we did, but we didn't. We didn't expect this to go the way it did." "You expected to win," I said. She hesitated, then admitted quietly, "Yes." There was something raw, almost painful in hearing the truth spoken plainly. I didn't hear excuses or justifications or attempts to rewrite the past. For the first time, they weren't defending themselves. They were facing themselves. "We aren't asking for money anymore," my father said. "We know we lost." "That isn't what matters," I replied. He frowned slightly. "What does matter?" I took a slow breath. "The fact that you only came back when there was something to gain." Their expressions tightened, not in anger but in regret. My mother's voice cracked. We were cowards. My father nodded. We were ashamed, and ashamed people make foolish decisions. For a long moment none of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy with the weight of 2 decades of silence. Finally I said softly, I needed you when I was a child, not now. My mother covered her mouth, stifling a sob. My father blinked several times, trying to steady himself. We know, and we'll carry that. I looked at them, really looked. They weren't young anymore. Their shoulders curved with age, their hair grayed, their eyes dimmer than the ones I remembered. Life had carved its lines into them, just as it had carved mine. But I had someone else waiting for me, someone who mattered. Jacob. He would be home soon, probably pacing in the kitchen, anxious to hear how the day had gone. He deserved my presence far more than these 2 ghosts from my past. I have to go, I said gently. My father stepped aside. My mother wiped her eyes and whispered, We're sorry, truly. I nodded once, not forgiveness, not rejection, just acknowledgement. Take care of yourselves, I said. Then I walked past them. Jacob was at the kitchen table, tapping his fingers anxiously when I came in. You're home, he said, jumping up. What happened? Did we win? Did they— We won, I said softly. Relief washed over his face. Good, they deserved. I raised a hand. They're still your grandparents. He hesitated. Are they never acted like it? I sat down at the table, motioning for him to join me. People make mistakes, Jacob, big ones, and sometimes they don't realize the damage until it's too late. He frowned, arms crossed. So what now? Now, such a simple question for something so complicated. I don't know, I admitted, but we're not going to let anger define this family, not ours. He softened. Grandma would have said that. I smiled. She would have. We sat there for a while, the weight of the day settling around us. The house felt different that evening, not because anything had changed, but because the ghosts of my past had finally stepped out of the shadows. And I realized they didn't hold power over me anymore. Later that night, after Jacob went to bed, I walked out to the porch. It was cool and still the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a quilt. I looked up at the sky, dark, dotted with stars Grandma would have called God's freckles. I hope I made you proud, I whispered. The wind rustled the leaves in the old maple tree, almost as if answering. Grandma had given me everything: love, stability, strength. But the greatest gift she left me wasn't the money. It was the ability to stand firmly in who I had become. Not the girl my parents abandoned, not the mistake they thought I was, but a woman with a career, a son, a home, a future, and a heart that still had room for mercy. Winning today didn't bring joy, but it brought truth. And sometimes truth is the first step toward healing. In the weeks after the court case, life settled into something quieter, calmer, almost like a long inhale after years of holding my breath. But healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes in small waves. It arrives in moments you don't expect, and sometimes in moments you resist. A few days after the verdict, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text message, a real letter written in my mother's handwriting. The same script she used to write my name on school permission slips when I was little. I hesitated before opening it. Jacob sat at the counter, crunching cereal, watching me with curiosity. You okay? Yes, I said, though my voice was softer than I intended, just not sure what's inside. He tilted his head. Do you want me to go? No, I said, stay. I opened the envelope slowly, like the paper itself might break if I rushed. Inside was a single page. No demands, no excuses, no accusations. Just a letter that said this. We were wrong. We didn't know how to be parents. We were more concerned with pride than with you. We can't take back what we did. We know you don't owe us anything. But if you ever wish to talk, we're here. Mom and Dad. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the note. Jacob leaned forward. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. He nodded in that thoughtful way he'd developed over the years, an old soul in a young man's body. Whatever you decide, it's your choice, not theirs. He was right. For the first time in my life, the choice was mine alone. I didn't reply right away. I wanted time to think, time to breathe, time to let the past sit beside the present without letting it overwhelm me. I spent more evenings on the porch, the same place where Grandma and I once talked about life under the soft glow of porch lights. One night as I rocked gently on the swing, I closed my eyes and imagined what Grandma might say if she were beside me. You don't have to hate them to protect yourself. Or maybe forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you don't let it poison you. She'd always had a way of simplifying the things that frightened me. Jacob joined me on the porch, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You're thinking about her." "I always think about her," I said. He nodded. I miss her crinkle-eyed smile. "Me too." We sat together listening to the distant sound of a neighbor's dog bark, the soft chirping of evening crickets. Life had moved forward around us, but grief had its own slow rhythm. After a long silence, Jacob said, "Are you going to meet them?" I sighed gently. Maybe, not to fix everything, just to acknowledge it. "If you do, I'll go with you." I smiled. "Thank you." He shrugged. "We're a team." And we were. A few days later, I made the decision. I didn't want bitterness to be the last chapter of our story. Not theirs, not mine. And not Jacob's. The past would never disappear, but maybe it didn't have to own the future. So I picked up the phone and dialed the number written at the bottom of my mother's letter. It rang twice, then 3 times. Finally, her voice, tentative, small, nothing like the woman who once threw me out of her kitchen. "Hello?" "Hi," I said quietly. "It's me." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Oh, sweetheart." That word hit me like an unexpected gust. Not because I believed it, but because I realized how long I had lived without hearing it. "I'm willing to meet," I said, "in public, somewhere neutral." Yes, of course, anywhere, anytime." We settled on a small diner just outside town, the kind with vinyl booths and pies displayed behind a glass case, a place with no history attached to it. When I arrived, they were already seated, both looking nervous, hands clasped on the table like school children waiting for a principal's verdict. I slid into the booth across from them. Nobody spoke at first. My father cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming." My mother reached for her water glass as if bracing herself. "We thought you wouldn't." "I almost didn't," I said honestly, "but avoiding things only gives them more power." They exchanged a glance, one filled not with manipulation but something closer to humility. My mother spoke first. "We were terrible parents." My father nodded. "Worse than terrible." A strange mix of pain and relief washed over me. Admissions of guilt rarely erase wounds, but they can loosen their grip. "What you did," I said slowly, "shaped my entire life. Every decision I made, every fear I carried, every step I took, came from what happened when I was 16. They both lowered their eyes. But I continued. "It also pushed me to become someone stronger than I ever imagined." My mother's voice shook. "We don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not offering it," I replied gently. "Not today. Maybe not ever. But I am willing to start with honesty." They nodded. No pushback, no defensiveness, just acceptance, quiet and overdue. We talked for almost an hour, not about money, not about the trial, but about simple things. Life, aging, regrets, Jacob, even small memories from before everything collapsed. By the time we left, we were not healed. We were not family again. But we were no longer strangers holding knives made of old pain. And that was enough. That evening I drove to the cemetery. The sun was setting peach-colored light stretching across the rows of headstones. I carried fresh flowers and placed them gently beside Grandma's grave. "I did my best," I whispered. Not just in court, but in the parts after that. A breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere nearby a bird chirped twice like a tiny echo of her approval. "I hope I made you proud." I closed my eyes, letting the quiet sink in. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past lifting, not gone, but lighter. And as I walked back to the car, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. Life didn't hand me the future I wanted. But I built a different one. One shaped by struggle, shaped by love, shaped by the woman who stepped in when others stepped out. And if there's anything I want people to take from my story, it's this. We don't get to choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the family we become. If my story touched you even a little, I hope you'll share it or leave a thought or simply hold someone a little closer today. Because you never know who's carrying a battle you can't see. Thank you for listening. 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 For listening.